Welcome to Season 4 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, lifelong helper, nonprofit founder, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for a decade with my blog, and I'm so grateful to now be sharing these inspiring conversations on our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Today, our guest is Jamie Beck, founder of the nonprofit Free to Thrive. I think you're going to be really inspired by the incredible work that she's doing to help survivors of human trafficking. I am so excited to have Jamie Beck with us here today, the founder of the nonprofit Free to Thrive. Welcome, Jamie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Heidi.
I'm so excited to learn more about your work at Free to Thrive. I have done I've had a number of conversations over the years about human trafficking, and I really think there's so many people who aren't really clear on exactly what human trafficking is. So maybe you can tell us a little bit what your organization does and a little bit about human trafficking before we dive in too deep.
Absolutely. So Free to Thrive helps human trafficking survivors with their legal needs. And we also do policy advocacy and training and education. And a big part of our training is to help educate the community about this issue, both through kind of more traditional trainings. We've also produced 2 films to help the community learn about this issue. And really, I'm so often surprised about how steep the learning curve is, that this is not an issue that we talk about as a community, and most people don't even know the basics. So let me start with what is human trafficking?
Yeah, I think it's super helpful, and because I agree with that. And until I met a survivor, I didn't understand it, and heard them speak, I didn't understand it. So I think it's really helpful. Yeah, I think it's really helpful.
So human trafficking is essentially, it's exploiting another person. It's generally speaking, it's exploiting them for sex or labor. It can be other things as well. And really, it's just taking advantage of someone and using them as a source of free labor, I guess. And when we're talking about human trafficking, it involves force, fraud, or coercion. When we're talking about labor trafficking, for sex trafficking, any minor involved in the commercial sex, that's human trafficking, regardless of force, fraud, or coercion. And an adult involved in any sort of commercial sex act requires force, fraud, or coercion.
And, it's so interesting to me and enlightening how this topic has changed, because when I was growing up, and I think I'm probably a little bit older than you, but we talked about prostitution. There was like, oh, those are prostitutes. It was always about, oh, those girls are bad. It was never about, the men that were paying for it. It was always that the women were getting arrested. And that was kind of the vibe. There was nothing that really gave us the backstory of what these, and I know it isn't always women, but I know a lot of trafficking is women. The backstories of how these people ended up in these situations, and every story is completely different. There's no set path, at least in the number of people that I've spoken to. They're very, very different every single time. And the most unexpected circumstances that take these people down these horrible paths.
It's really true. There is no one story of human trafficking. I think that's part of the challenge of educating the community, because people attend a training or they hear one survivor story and they think, okay, now I get it. Now I understand human trafficking. But there's so many different types. I mean, just to name a few within sex trafficking is, pornography. There's a lot of human trafficking happening within the pornography industry, which people don't realize how much exploitation there is there. There's human trafficking both with street prostitution and online prostitution. There's now new ways of selling sex online through websites like OnlyFans, where certainly some people are choosing to sell themselves online, but there's a lot of people who are being coerced into that work. But there's strip clubs are also very often, there's trafficking happening at or in connection with a strip club. There's illicit massage, there's brothels. I mean, there's so many different ways. Just sex trafficking. We didn't even talk about labor trafficking.
It's amazing to me to think about that. And I want to say, and I've interviewed a couple of really interesting people over the years, but I want to say, and you can correct me because I'm really famous for quoting statistics wrong, but that there are more people enslaved in the world today than ever before. Is that true?
That's true. From everything I've read, that's accurate, which is just
It, it
completely shocking.
it just gives me the chills everywhere. I mean, it just makes me, you think how in this world where you can maybe potentially understand when we didn't have communication systems years ago, how this could happen because someone wouldn't be able to communicate to reach out to get help. But now the communication is almost part of the problem, and versus a solution for rescuing them, it's almost part of the problem. It, it
Yeah.
it's just it's just devastating. It's absolutely devastating. So I know when people are young and they say, when I'm older, I want to grow up and be this, an attorney, obviously, maybe in your case. People don't usually say they want to be a nonprofit founder. That's just usually doesn't make the top 10 or the top 50 on the list. So there's always a journey and something that happens, and it's usually a crazy, unexpected path. It's never a straight path. It's never something anybody wanted. It's something that just happens. And so share with us, because you're an attorney, share with us your journey from being an attorney to a nonprofit founder, because that is, you worked really hard to be an attorney, and you probably worked twice as hard being a nonprofit founder. But
Well,
talk to me, Jamie, about the journey.
absolutely. It's so funny that you say that. I've never thought about it, but it's really true. You don't have a whole lot of kids saying, "I want to start a nonprofit when I grow up."
No.
And I certainly didn't say that as a kid. I was always very involved in the community growing up in some ways, helping out in ways big and small, and that's something that I grew up with, that mentality of giving back. But
Right.
I really thought I would do that as a lawyer. And that's a huge part of why I went to law school. And I did say I want to be a lawyer when I grew up, when I was younger, and was fortunate enough to be able to follow that path and achieve my dream of being an attorney. And I I graduated from law school, and as most lawyers graduating from law school, had a ton of student debt, and
Yep.
I was very fortunate that I got a job at a big law firm in San Diego. And my thought, I went to law school wanting to be a public interest lawyer, but had student debt, got a great opportunity at a law firm, and I said, I'll work there for a couple of years and pay down my student loans, and then I'll figure out my path from there. And while I was there, the way that I filled my cup of this need to give back and to do some good in my community was through volunteer work and pro bono work at my law firm. And so that that was actually the very beginning of what put me on this path. And what happened was I was um, both really involved in our feminist bar association, which is called Lawyers Club of San Diego, and also taking pro bono cases from local legal nonprofits. And a lot of things happened, and as I'm sure you probably hear from other nonprofit founders, like sometimes you end up on this path and the path starts to take you away. Like it became something like I
It's a
just kept saying
current.
yes.
It's a
It
current.
is.
It will just take you down the river. It just takes you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of things happened all at once that all put me on this path. One thing was that Lawyers Club took a specific interest in the issue of human trafficking. And so we were doing education around it. And I was learning that at, kind of legal trainings, that there's this huge problem in San Diego. That's where I first learned about human trafficking, is at these trainings, finding out it's happening in my community. There's a huge need for lawyers to help survivors. And I was like, okay, well, I'm a lawyer. I can help survivors. And this is something that, okay, this is a way for me to give back. And, certainly when you start to hear survivor stories, you immediately just, any person I speak to, they just say, what can I do to help? And I said that, I said, what can I do to help? So I took a pro bono case with a survivor who she had some criminal charges related to her trafficking. And so I worked with another attorney at my law firm who had some criminal law experience. I'm a civil lawyer at the time, so like don't know
Right.
anything about criminal law, and I'm trying to help the
Right.
survivor. And she was just absolutely incredible. She was, she didn't have a lot of the kind of vulnerabilities that people often assume that trafficking victims have. She came from a loving two-parent home. She was very close with her family, middle class family, very good student. She was just a normal teenager, and she fell in love with an older guy. And it was actually him and his family exploited her.
Oh
Um,
God.
and it's crazy. You just can't imagine that these things happen. And there's so much shame that happens that she didn't tell her family what was going on. And it just kept kind of pulling her further and further into this world. And by the time she turned 18, he, had complete control over her, and she had been kidnapped at that point, and was really, no longer like able to talk to her family and things like that. So I get to know her. I get to know her story. I help her with these criminal charges. And we essentially, what the ultimate outcome of her criminal case was an expungement. It was, you did the things the court asked you to do, and you have a clean record, right? And as a civil lawyer, not knowing anything about criminal law, I did not know that an expungement in California, and probably in a lot of other states as well, if an employer runs your criminal background, that still shows up. And we all think expungement means wiped clean.
Yeah,
that's not
clean.
True.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. As an attorney, I was like, well, your record's expunged, you're good to go. And so what happened was she got her GED while I was working with her. She then goes on to college, and she's trying to get a job while she's in college. And she was looking at retail jobs and restaurant jobs, and she couldn't get a job because of her background.
They were running it. Wow.
They were running it. And so she calls me up and she's like, Jamie, I can't get a job. Is there anything you could help? And I'm like, we expunged your record. There is nothing else we can do. Now, at the same time, this is where kind of the universe started to conspire on
that's what
my
happens,
behalf.
By the way. That's
right?
the way it works. There are no coincidences, as you now know.
No, it's so funny. Ever since going down this path, I say that repeatedly, is I don't believe in coincidences. And this is just one of those moments where just magical things happened. And what happened was, I'm getting this call from my client saying, I can't get a job. And then at the same time, so I mentioned we were doing trainings. Well, we learned at one of these trainings that we hosted that there are these laws called vacatur laws. And those laws allow human trafficking survivors to clear criminal charges from their records that are related to their trafficking. And a vacatur law, usually, like every state's law is different, but the idea is that it's a full fresh start, and the charges actually are cleared off your record completely, not like everyone can see them when they run your background. And so then this group of lawyers at Lawyers Club were like, okay, well, we understand that there are these laws in other states. At that time, there's 11 other states. This is about 2014, maybe 2015. 11 other states had these laws around the country. And we said, well, why don't we have this in California? And another part of the work that we were doing to address human trafficking was legislative advocacy. So we have this training in October, and then we have this legislative roundtable in December where we pitch ideas to elected officials for new bills that will help survivors. And so we said, we have to put this at the top of our list. And so that in just 2 months later in December, we pitched this. A local state senator, Marty Block, took up the bill, and he said, we're going to pass a vacatur bill. He introduces the bill in January. And this is my first experience with legislative advocacy. I'm like, this is so easy. Like, you just give an idea to a legislator, and then they make a bill, and then it becomes the law. Why is this so difficult?
I've never heard government working this quickly ever. And I've spent a lot of time in DMV lines and post offices, and I have never heard of anything like that. That's crazy. That's fantastic.
It was crazy. And all the while, during that whole year while we were advocating for this bill, I kept calling my client saying, we're working on changing the law. Like, there's nothing that I can do to help you right now, but we're going to change the law. And, I can't make any promises, but, we're going to try. And if we pass the law, then I'll help you. So lo and behold, the good thing is this is something that's really hard for people to oppose, right? Like, who doesn't want to help human trafficking survivors who have these criminal charges? I won't go down the rabbit hole of telling you who doesn't, but very, very little opposition. And so we pass the bill, and I call her up and I say, we passed this law. You're going to be my first client. I have no idea what we're doing, but I'm going to figure this out. We're going to figure it out together. So as long as you're willing to be patient with me, not having any clue what I'm doing, let's do it. So I take this first case, and universe is still conspiring. Around that time, a RFP came out from the County of San Diego for pro bono legal services for human trafficking survivors.
What's an RFP?
I'm sorry, a request for proposal. It was basically a contract with the County of San Diego for somebody to provide free legal services to trafficking survivors.
Okay.
And this really happened because there was a huge unmet need. Nobody was doing this work in San Diego. Like, here I'm a pro bono lawyer, and I definitely can't take all the cases of all the survivors that need this help. And we now have this new law. So we have all these survivors who not only need it now, but survivors for years who've needed this help but could never get it.
So the
So there's just
backlog
a
is
flood,
huge. Right.
huge backlog. So I take this case, and at this point, I've been involved in anti-trafficking work for 2 or 3 years, and this is now my passion. I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to do as a lawyer. I'm terribly bored with my law firm work,
Right.
and all my cases just are not, tugging on my heartstrings the way this one survivor's case is. And so at this point, I apply for this funding. I have this name. At this point, I had a name of a nonprofit. I'd filed articles of incorporation. I've created this nonprofit called Free to
Right.
Thrive. I don't have a board. I don't have 501c3 status. I have a name.
And you don't,
But I
and
did.
I'm guessing you didn't know what you were doing, because most
Oh, I
people
had no
don't.
clue. No,
Right.
and even as an attorney, they don't teach you anything about running a business or a
Right.
nonprofit in law school. So this was all new to me. But what I did have is a really, really extensive business plan. At this point, I had spent about a year and a half designing Free to Thrive and creating my dream organization through tons of research, conversations with local nonprofits, with anti-trafficking nonprofits around the country. So I had a vision. I understood what the services that we'd offer and how we deliver them and what the model was. We just didn't have the funding to do it, or the organizational structure to do the work.
Which is I mean, it's so fascinating to me, because we have 1.6 million nonprofits in the United States, and all of us are entrepreneurs. All of us who start nonprofits are entrepreneurs, and yet our business model, you talk about your business plan, is relying on the kindness of others to fund our vision and our plan. And we're running a business just like anybody else. We just need kindness and generosity as part of the equation, which isn't always the best or easiest business model. Just my experience, just saying, doesn't mean people aren't kind and generous, because people are amazing, but it's just a little bit harder. So talk to me about some of the challenges you had out the door, and what have continued to be some of your challenges with this work, because it's the hardest work anyone will ever do, and the most rewarding and the hardest.
It's so true. It's so true. And I couldn't agree more with what you said. So, at the beginning, it was just like drinking from a fire hose. The need was so great. And there was not enough time in the day. I was doing this by myself. We had no staff. We had some pro bono lawyers. I had some volunteers, but it was just me. And yeah, so I'm trying to do this by myself and try to get it started with enough, very little funding. We also only had 1 year of funding. So I didn't say that, we did end up getting this funding, this contract from the County of San Diego, which was exactly 1 year of funding for my salary and some of our startup costs. And then I got one grant from one foundation that also helped cover initial startup costs to get it off the ground.
Right.
In the beginning, we're building a board, we're getting our tax status, doing all the things that we need to do. And just all the things that you do to start a nonprofit. And the early days were really learning everything. I think this is one that I talk to a lot of people about starting nonprofits, or who want to, or who are at the early stages, and
Right.
the learning how governance, finance, running your board, all the different things that you need to do to run a nonprofit, on top of designing your programs and offering your services. Yep. And staffing and HR and personnel things. Once you start to grow your team, all of those things all at once, you're just learning a ton. So that was like the
it's crazy
early years.
And I think one of the hardest things, you talk about working, drinking from a fire hose. I think one of the hardest things, and one of the things we realize, most of us realize, hopefully earlier than later, but it may take a minute. There's a moment when we realize we can't help everybody. There's a moment when we realize that the need is greater than our solution. And it's one of the hardest moments as a nonprofit founder, when you haven't slept, you haven't done your laundry, and yet you feel that you have the backs of these people on you, and you feel so responsible to them. And I can only imagine your situation, because you're building real relationships with these people that you're serving. That we go to bed at night, and it's not like we didn't make enough pencils in the pencil factory. We go to bed at night thinking of all the people we didn't finish helping, who weren't going to eat, or weren't going to be have their records expunged, or aren't going to be safe, or whatever's going to happen to them because of our work. And it's a different kind of challenge. I think it's a different kind of weight that I don't think most entrepreneurs experience. I think it's
so true. And the I think one of the hardest things about being
a nonprofit is that the need for your services, if you are doing something that is having an impact on the community, the need for your services almost always will outpace your capacity to fill it. So we went
Yep.
from a staff of 1 to a staff of 14.
Oh,
We've grown our
wow.
services. We've
Congrats.
grown. Thank you. It's been an
That's
amazing journey.
huge.
We've grown our geographic footprint, and we are still woefully understaffed and underfunded to meet the need for our services, to the point
Right.
where it's daunting. And what you said about realizing that we can't help everybody, that is one of the hardest things,
The
is saying
hardest.
I've had to learn how to say no. And that it's like, if
It's
you're
horrible.
going to this work, you want to help people, right? We want to help
Right.
everybody that contacts us. There's so many people that we have to turn away, either because they don't fit in within the geographic area we serve, their needs don't align with the services that we do, or we just don't have the capacity
Right.
to help them. And it's always a struggle between doing the best, highest quality work for the clients that we're currently serving
Right.
versus helping everybody who needs our help. So that struggle is
Exactly.
real.
And the struggle is absolutely real. So I always say, like, the bucket, I call it the bucket. The bucket is heavy when, you still have to do your laundry. You've got to go to the grocery store. You have all these people who need you for something really serious, really big, really intense. And you're just like, I don't know how I'm going to pick up that bucket today. Because at the end of the day, it does stop with us. Yes, we have a community, and I've never met a nonprofit founder that says, oh, yeah, I did this myself. Every single person, it takes a huge village to do this work, but it's still our bucket because it's our vision, it's our dream, it's our whatever it is, and it's ours. And so what do you do when that bucket's heavy? What fuels you to keep going?
So in doing this work, I've had to learn truly, like, what self-care means. And it's a term that gets thrown around so much, but I've had to actually learn to identify my needs and take care of myself, because I know that I cannot sustain this work if I don't. And I've also had to help learn and grow with my team as we've grown, so that we can all sustain this work together. And
Right.
so part of it is slowing down at times to take care of myself, and to do the things I need to do, trying to have daily practices. It can't be like, oh, I did my self-care, I'm good for a while. Like,
Right.
it has to be a
Check.
daily practice,
Right.
because it's kind of a never ending. And particularly with working with trauma survivors, which many nonprofit leaders do, many nonprofits work
Right.
with people who've experienced trauma. The residual trauma or vicarious trauma that we experience from this work is very heavy, and it has serious mental health impacts. And that's something that I had to learn through experience of, I was having all these direct symptoms of vicarious trauma, and only did I learn about it through trainings on vicarious trauma. I was like, oh, this is happening to me. I need to
Exactly.
do something about this. And so I've learned a lot about vicarious trauma and how to address it. But to the point of, like, what fuels you, like, part is like, how do I sustain this work? And the other piece
Right.
is what fuels me.
To
And
keep doing it.
it truly is our clients. I mean, they are so incredible. And, when I think about both their stories and what they've overcome, one, it, like, anything that I experience pales in comparison to what they've
Right.
experienced and what they've overcome. So, like, on any hard day, like, I think about my clients and their strength and their resilience. And also, I think about the wins. We spend a lot of time at Free to Thrive. Like, we have a lot of hard days, and we talk a lot about the wins because they're so powerful. When we think about, like, what does it mean to have this client's record completely cleared?
Right.
What does it mean for her to have a restraining order, custody of her child? Like, these are things that they're you just can't quantify the impact on that person's life, on their children's life, on breaking generational cycles. It's incredibly powerful. And so I have to come back to the why of why I do this work, why we exist.
And I think that impact you mentioned is so important. I have such a love-hate relationship with that word in the nonprofit space. We write grants to get funded, and we have to, measure our success and measure our impact. And how do you measure someone getting their child back? How do you measure someone being able to get a job? How do you measure, you can say how many hours you worked and how many people you served, how many people you fed, and all of those great statistics. But if you had to measure your impact, what would you, and you mentioned some things earlier about, you've grown your staff, you've grown the area that you're serving, but what are some of the things you would say that your impact is? And it could be a story or it could be statistics. I have um, no marriage to that word. I think it can mean a lot of things. And I think it gets overused in the and misused in the nonprofit space.
It's so true. I also have a love-hate relationship with that word for that reason. I just like you're speaking to my soul as you're talking. So I'm just like, oh, I feel all these things very deeply. Um, there's, we this world we talk about quantitative and qualitative data and how we measure impact those ways. And the qualitative way is, how many clients have we served and how have we helped them? And we actually have a really exciting data point that I was looking at our data. I was like, oh my gosh, we're about to hit a huge milestone. We're about to have our 500th completed legal matter.
Oh,
So
wow.
which is insane.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So
That's huge.
we've been a nonprofit for 6 years, serving clients for 5 years. And, the first couple of years, our numbers were so small because we're still just so much trying to get up and running and learning how to do the work. And we've gained a lot of momentum. And so just to hit that number is incredible. It took me back. I was like, oh my gosh, like, wow, we've done that. That's amazing.
And it's
Then
not just the 500, it's the ripple effect of all those lives because they're
exactly.
mothers, they have children, they have the impact is so much bigger than just that.
And yeah, and that's where you get to the qualitative, and each one of those numbers represents a life and a person. And many of our clients, each client may have multiple legal matters, and what each of those cases or legal matters does to break down some barrier that they face. I mean, we're talking about them being able to get jobs and housing, and it's I have there's so many clients who I think about their stories, and I can't even believe the journey that they've had. But one client, when I first met her, she had a criminal record in 3 different counties in Southern California. She had warrants in 2 counties, and she was nervous just to leave San Diego because she was worried that if she went to Orange County or Los Angeles, she would get arrested because of these old warrants. And these were like 10-year-old cases. She had been,
Wow.
out of the life for a very long time and had moved on with her life. But she would apply for jobs and she'd get the job. She'd start doing the job, and then they'd run a background check and they'd say, "We love you. We want you on our staff, but we can't keep you because of your
Uh,
background." So she just had this, she had very limited options. And, we were able to clear her entire record. During the time that we were working with her, she relocated. So she needed housing. She was looking for a new job, and she was able to get an apartment, to get a job because of the work that we had done. And now she's just, she's doing incredible, and she's, doing really impactful work, working with survivors of trauma, and work that she may have not been able to clear a background check to get that job in the past.
that's fantastic. I love that. That's a happy ending. So if you could dream any dream for your organization, what does that look like? You have to be a dreamer, Jamie, when you're doing this work. And obviously you had a dream when you started Free to Thrive. So what does that big dream look like for you?
I have lots of dreams for Free to Thrive, both big and small, and short and long term. So the kind of big visionary dream is to be a global organization, to work on this issue, not just locally or regionally, but on a global level. Of the human trafficking is a global issue, and I would love Free to Thrive to have a global footprint and help survivors everywhere. I also would very much love to expand to serve survivors of other types of interpersonal violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood trauma. Most of our clients are what we call poly victims. They have lives that have had all of those types of trauma or multiple types of trauma. But sometimes people will contact us and they're a DV survivor, and so we can't help them because they fall outside of our mission. And so I'd love to be
Right.
able to help. There's such a huge unmet need for services for survivors of different types of trauma. And then the other, real practical dream that I have, that when you talk about challenges, kind of goes back to that, is to have to be a sustainable organization when it comes to our funding.
Right.
It almost all of our funding
That's the
right
holy
now.
grail. That's the holy grail of nonprofit.
Right.
That's the holy
It
grail.
is.
It's the
You know,
holy
almost all of
grail.
our funding is a single year, grant or, government contract or a donor who's given a gift that is a 1 year gift. And so every single year we start from zero. And
Yep.
so right now we're really working on, multi-year funding, but it was hard before the pandemic. It has gotten harder and harder each year. I thought it would start to get easier, but it's only gotten worse.
I agree with that. I was just talking, I run a nonprofit by day, and we're doing our projections for next year. And with the economic downturn and things that are, the state of things right now, we're really nervous making projections because what I think people don't realize about nonprofits, when we're looking at our budget and setting our budget for the year, we're projecting how much money we're going to raise and how many people we're going to serve. And it's kind of pie in the sky. It's a little bit like pin the tail on the donkey. I mean, you think that this foundation is going to support you, and they probably will because they have in the past, but you don't really know. And it's really hard running a business that has payroll and lights and all the expenses, marketing, all the things that businesses have, when you're trying to project something. And I feel exactly what you're saying, because I literally had a conversation this morning about, oh my gosh, I'm nervous for next year's projections. I just don't know what it's going to look like. And people are so great, but when they're, when they can't fill their gas tank or whatever they're dealing, their own grocery bill has gone up significantly, it makes their giving takes a hit, right? Of course it does.
It really is. And the added challenge that I don't think our donors truly understand is when we're talking about these challenges, of rising inflation and cost of living going up, that impacts our staff too. And if we can't keep pace and pay them, if we can't keep pace with inflation and increase their salaries every year, then they're actually losing money, right?
Right.
They're effectively losing money because their spending power is decreasing year over year. And yet our funders, they'll give the same gift each year. So, and not every funder, some have grown with us,
Right.
but many funders, it's like a foundation of like, oh, we're going to give our annual gift of this amount, just like we gave last year, with no accounting for the fact that our cost of doing this is our insurance costs have skyrocketed over the last 3 years. It's insane.
And not to mention that, and I heard it today, that dollar that we all have, that we were holding, that paper dollar, is really worth 88 cents right now. It's really 88 cents. It's not a dollar. And so if you get, that whatever donation, it's not worth to your point, exactly what it was. And donors are wonderful and fantastic, but they don't always realize that. So it's, and you just don't want to be ungrateful, but it's just a reality that we all deal with. And it's a huge challenge. So I can only imagine, in the last 6 years, there have been a number of life lessons that have gone with this work. And one of the things you said, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder, but one of the things that you did say, which I think is one of the best things about doing this work, is that we get slapped upside the head when we're having a bad day. Our perspective is just like, wait, what? I had to pay more at the grocery store or whatever, and this person just had this happening. So we get this wonderful gift of perspective that is part of our pay for the long hours and the work that we do. But what are some of the lessons that you've learned from doing this work?
One thing is to surround myself with people who know more than me and who have strengths that balance out my weaknesses or areas of growth, both on my staff and board. I one of the things I love is finding our staff's what I call their sweet spot. People may come join our team for a particular position, and part of my role is helping find what their highest and best use is at our organization, and kind of learning that. But so oftentimes there's people both on our staff and on our board who can fill my own gaps, right? Like I came in with no finance experience, and that being one of my areas, knowing going into this of like, this is extremely important for us to exist as an organization. It is not anything I have any professional training on. So I need to surround myself with people who know way more about nonprofit finance than I do. And so I, had people on the board that are amazing, nonprofit finance and for-profit finance experts, so that they've generously taught me, everything from, budgeting to, payroll and finances and
Right.
all of the tax compliance, all the
Cash
things that I
flow
had to
and
learn.
990s and
Yeah,
all that fun
all of
stuff we
it.
get to do.
So
It's a
that's been a
lot.
huge part of it. Learning my own strengths and weaknesses, growing as a leader. It's one thing to run an organization just you. It's another thing to have a staff of people and to be able to have a vision and lead them forward and support them. The past few years have been so tremendously challenging for all of us. And, not only are we doing this work remotely for 2 years, but all of us have faced our own personal adversity on top of the adversity that the world is facing right now. And,
Right.
being there to support each other. I think one of the great gifts for me is to be able to create an environment that is truly a supportive and inclusive workplace. I created the place that I wanted to work. Law firms are not a really great
Right.
environment for people. They're not a great place for women. They're not a great place for people of color. And I, definitely had my own experiences as a woman at a law firm that, faced lots of barriers and tons of, things that I wouldn't want anybody else to experience. And it's a great privilege and honor to create the workplace that I want to work here, because we really care about everybody at the organization and really work so hard to support one another through all these difficult moments. And that's been a learning curve of how do you do that? How do you even
Right.
create that type of workplace, and
That
how do you
culture.
attract people? Yeah, it's all about the culture.
That culture
There's been
is key. Culture is key.
Yeah, it really is. And how do you
Culture does
cultivate it?
go right. It
Yeah.
is a process, and it's a long process, but it does almost override not the work, but it overrides so many things. And I think creating a great work culture is something that doesn't get enough value and attention. I think it's a super valuable thing. So do you think that you've
Yeah.
changed in this last 6 years? Do you think you've changed with all of these experiences?
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely a completely different person than when I started.
And how so?
It's so hard to put my finger on it. I think I've just grown a lot as a person, and as a leader. I've learned a lot of lessons, many the hard way. I mean,
That's how
we
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 usually learn
said
them. That's how we learn them,
yeah,
Jamie.
and it's I would much rather not, but I think that's just how life is. But we kept saying we're building the plane while we're flying it, and that's what we've been doing, and that sometimes means that you're gonna crash a couple of
You're
times.
gonna
And
crash.
we there's definitely been a lot of lessons along the way, but I think just my I'm just constantly learning and growing and finding how to be better and do better. And I think one of the areas I'm learning a lot about myself in this process. And um like one area for me is my mo is like I'm always looking forward, and I oftentimes like my attitude is like just keep pushing, like it doesn't matter how hard things are, just like keep, I'm
Right.
extremely hard worker. And what I do is I push things down. Like I don't stop to take time to process things, to feel feelings when something is,
Right.
when things happen, right? Good or bad. Like I'm just like, we got a grant, cool, let's keep going. Or wow, that was really awful and that's super, sad or traumatic. I'm just like, let's keep going, let's keep going. And I can't do that in this work. That's
Uh-uh.
not healthy.
Mm-mm.
And so I've had to learn to slow down, to feel feelings, to process things, which we
Right.
don't really talk about in the professional world of feeling feelings and processing
Mm,
emotions and
right. Well,
all
and
those
also
things, but you have to.
you're in a position of being a sponge, and you have to let it flow through you. And
Mhm.
how can you be a sponge and not absorb some of that pain? And when you're a keeper of such pain, um, it is not easy for pain to flow through the sponge. And
Yeah.
we take it on and we make it our own. And then we work ourselves into these, crazy spots. And I think it's part of, I don't want to say it's part of the makeup of a nonprofit founder, but it kind of is. It kind of goes with the turf. We're all Energizer bunnies. We all go a million miles an hour. And to your plane crash analogy, I use it with the car, but I always say to my board, I'm driving in a race and I don't have the time to stop and pull over and check the oil and rotate the tires. I just don't.
Yeah.
I have to keep
Yeah.
going. And we really have to stop and put oil in the car, and we really have to stop and check the tires, and we really have to slow down and make sure everything's okay before we move ahead. And I think it's a hard lesson for a lot of us. I mean, I know it wasn't easy for me. It's
So true.
it's definitely tricky. So tell me where we can support you, where we can donate, how we can volunteer, all of those great things. What can we do to help Free to Thrive?
Well, I of course love that question and so appreciate it. Our website is freetothrive.org, and our social media handles are Free to Thrive SD for Instagram and Facebook. I think LinkedIn is just Free to Thrive. So you can definitely go to our social media. We actually have our annual gala coming up in, I can't believe this, a week and 2 days from now in San Diego. We're just about sold out. I think the event, I'm now looking at it,
Congratulations.
the event's going to be over now, but I think about by the time this runs.
Yes.
But so we do have kind of annual events to attend. We have two. I would say if people want to learn more about human trafficking, we have two incredible films that are on Amazon Prime that people should definitely watch. One is called Starfish, and one is called Last Warning Shot. They're both co-produced with False Heart Productions and are both narrative films about human trafficking, where
Awesome.
we want people to watch these films and learn about this, and do have film screenings. Host a screening for your book club or your parent group or your community group or your Rotary Club, because we want people to learn this information. And that's one way of getting involved, is to help out
That's a
with that. And
great idea.
and lawyers can be pro bono lawyers for us if you're licensed to practice in California. And if we're also growing our board, so we have opportunities to get involved in that way as well.
That is awesome. Well, Jamie, you are amazing, and I love what you're doing to help so many people. 500, congratulations. We're so excited. And thank you for sharing your story with us and your incredible work. We're really grateful.
Thank you so much for having me and for the work that you're doing. We're all in this together.
We are all in this together. That's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to Jamie Beck about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think Jamie's comment about growing as a leader was so inspiring and true. To learn more about modern day heroes like Jamie, or if you'd like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared this with your family and your friends. And please don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe. Remember, together, we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. Charity matters.